How-To with Q from QC Consigns. I am Q, and we're going to be continuing this series that I started last year, where I am helping others who want to start a resale business learn certain tricks of the trade or just understand different parts of reselling. So we are at the stage now where we've acquired some product and we want to prep that product for listing. So today I am going to be teaching some of you viewers how to actually measure and how to evaluate your product to get it prepared for a listing. And what I'm going to show you today, for many of you, it's going to be things you already know, but for a lot of you, you may not know how to measure a garment properly to be able to give your buyer the wealth of information he or she may need to actually make an online purchase. So remember, your buyer doesn't get to try these items on before they purchase them. So you want to make sure that you give them as much information as possible. And the most important parts of the information that that buyer needs to know is how the item or the garment measures, as well as the condition that item may be in. And so I'm just going to hit on a few highlights today, but I am sure I'm not going to cover every single thing that there is, so forgive me if I don't. This is not going to be a library of information, but it's definitely going to be information that can get you started. So I have some items in front of me that I am going to be showing some very key measurements on today, as well as I'm going to be talking about some of the tools that you may want to have on hand to use when you are measuring these garments, as well as what you may want to use when you're evaluating the garment for its conditions. So before I get started, I guess a few things that I want to make sure that I make you aware of. The items that I am going to be using in today's demonstration, some of these items are on our website for sale, but this is not a selling debut. I'm not selling items to you today like I normally do on Wind Down Friday or some other YouTube video or Instagram video that you normally see me in. Today, I'm just going to be showing you items that, again, you may see on our store site, but we're just going to be talking about how to evaluate some of these items. So before I actually show you how to measure, I'm going to talk about some of the items that I have in front of me today. So I have a pair of men's long chino pants or denim-inspired 5-pocket pants. I have a really cool woman's top. I've got a skirt. And I have a handbag. So I'm going to be using these items to kind of show you how to measure, what to look for, how to evaluate them. And before we get going on that, I just want to let you know there are a few tools that you may want to definitely have at your disposal when possible, when you're getting ready to evaluate or measure the garment. The first one is a measuring tape. So this is a measuring tape, for those of you that may not know, but this is a soft measuring tape is what it is called. And it's a really, really good one. It's in centimeters as well as it's in inches. And since we are here in the United States, we do use inches, but if you prefer to also convert to centimeters, you're most certainly welcome to. So this is definitely an important tool to have when measuring and evaluating your garments and or product in general. Something else that I have, this is actually a quilting ruler. It is a clear plastic ruler. You do not need to use a ruler like this. It just happens to be one that I have on hand. But if you have something that is hard, straight edge with a true straight edge, I would say get yourself a clear plastic ruler. You can buy one of these pretty much anywhere from Michael's to Staples or any Office Depot supply store, and or maybe a Joann's Fabric. And it doesn't have to be a quilting one, clear ruler. It just happens to be one that I have, but it's a very hard ruler, and it has a straight edge, and that's what's going to be most important in this demonstration. Some of the other things that I want to make you aware of when evaluating your product or measuring your product, specifically when you're evaluating your product for the condition of the product. You want to make sure that you're in an area, a space, or a room that has bright light. Whether it be natural light from sunlight, kind of like what I have today, and or overhead lights, kind of what I've got here above me, or even kind of just spotlights. But the reason why you want to have some kind of light, or definitely a bright light lit room or a bright light lit area, is because you want to be able to see any kind of stains, any kind of markings, any kind of flaw that might be on that item that you may not normally see. Now, what I will say to you, depending on the type of item I'm evaluating for condition, sometimes I may even have a magnifying glass. And I know that sounds dramatic and may be overdone, but it is true. Because sometimes with that magnifying glass, you can find small tears and rips on garments and on items that maybe you don't see with the naked eye, especially on things like leather. Black leather specifically, you will not see a cut or a slice in that item. And so that's some of the things that you want to kind of be mindful of. So those are a few tools. I am sure others of you out there may have some other tools that you use when evaluating your garments, as well as when measuring your garments. And if you do, that is fantastic. Please, I encourage you to make comments and definitely share kind of your advice on what else an individual who's just breaking into the resale industry could do to actually make sure that they put their best foot forward when creating a listing and making sure they put the right information in there so that a buyer can be well informed before making his or her purchase. So that's it for my short introduction on what we're going to be doing today, what we're going to be looking at, the kind of tools that you would need, and the environment you want to kind of do it in. All right, so I am going to pause the video here. Why don't you go on ahead and grab yourself a couple of items if you want to follow along with me, as well as the tools that you may need. Please also make sure that you're evaluating your garments or measuring your garments on a hard, flat surface that helps you be able to really just kind of lay that garment out properly and it's not hanging off the edge of something or things of that nature. So that's also, you know, a good tip as well. All right, so I am going to pause this video and I'm going to come back and we're going to get started on our first part of this segment, which is how to measure. I want to actually show those of you who may have never ever used a measuring tape before how to actually read a measuring tape. I think that's the first most important thing to do. So here is a soft measuring tape, as I expressed earlier, that you would need. And as you can see, the top half of my measuring tape's in centimeters. The bottom half of my measuring tape is in inches. Hopefully you guys can see that really well. And like I said earlier, since we are here in the United States, we mostly measure in inches. So I am going to review the inch area, which is the bottom half of my tape, to get you to understand how to calculate the lines, if you will, that are on a measuring tape. So this measuring tape is in 1 inch increments. So as you can see here, as you go across the tape, it's in 1 inch increments, okay? So it'll go all the way from 1 inch, this tape, sorry not to make you dizzy, goes all the way to 60 inches, okay? So my measuring tape is from 1 inch to 60 inches, and most measuring tapes are, by the way. So, okay, a lot of measuring tapes have this metal tip. Do not let this metal tip discourage you from understanding kind of what to measure. What this is basically from this metal tip to that number 1 is 1 inch. No different from this number 1 to that number 2 is also 1 inch. Together, these make 2 inches. Okay? Now, in between each inch are smaller inches. And each line that goes across each of these little lines until you get to the next inch is called an 1/8 of an inch. 1/8 of an inch is each of these little lines. Now, as you go across and you add up each line collectively adds on an 1/8 of an inch. So from this dark line here to this line is an 1/8. From this line to this line is 1/4 of an inch. From this line to this line is 3/8 of an inch. And then from this line, adding this line here, which is the center marking between 1 inch, is called 1/2 of an inch. Then if you were to add another 8 to that, that would be considered where this line is 5/8 of an inch. And then as you go across, adding this line is 3/4 of an inch. Adding this line is 7/8 of an inch. And then you have a full inch. So I'll review that again. This line is an 1/8, 1/4, 3/8. Your midpoint of an inch is 1/2 of an inch. Adding an additional inch is 5/8. One more 1/8 is 3/4. Another 1/8 is 7/8. And then your full inch. So if I was to add from here, this metal tip, to this center line, that would be considered 1.5 inches. I hope this makes sense so that when you are measuring your garment, you know exactly how to measure and how to calculate each 1/8 increment on the measuring tape. Okay, our first item that we're going to be learning how to measure today is our skirt. So we picked this skirt specifically because it's a little bit more of a difficult item to measure with the fringes, as well as the fact that it has different measuring points of length, body length. So we thought this one would be really, really good. As you can see, we have our garment laid out flat on the table. None of our garment is hanging off the table at all, as our table is large enough to actually be able to lay this garment out nicely. So there are only a few measurements that you'll want to provide your buyer for a skirt. You want to measure the waist. You want to measure, if you can, the hip. And you want to give the body length of the skirt. So those are top 3 measurements for a skirt. You can also give certain detail measurements. So like in this case, you may want to give length of the fringe, as well as you may want to give a center front length to the seam where the fringe starts and the skirt piece stops. And you may want to give a side length so that your buyer knows that the garment is maybe a different length on the side than it is on the front. And you also may want to give a center back length, meaning flipping the garment over and actually measuring center back down to understand if the front and the back lengths are different as well. So we're going to go on ahead and get started. And we're going to take our trusty measuring tape and we are going to learn how to measure this specific garment, which is a skirt. So I like to turn my items sometimes facing me. So I'm going to turn my skirt this way, where if I'm measuring the waist is actually facing me. Some people like to do it where the waist is away from them, and that's okay. You can if you like, if that's easier for you, but I prefer it to be facing me. Now, as you can see, my skirt still doesn't hang off the edge of my table that I'm using today. But let's just say you're someone where you don't have a table the size of mine. It is okay if you're measuring the waist to just fold your item up at the bottom so it's not hanging off while you measure the waist. That is perfectly fine. Okay, let's get started. So to measure the waist, you want to make sure the front and the back panels are evenly laid one on top of the other so that they are creating a straight edge, or as straight as possible, of an angle. You want to make sure you pull out all of the fabric from the back, because sometimes back panels of a garment is made bigger than a front panel. So you want to make sure all of that is pulled out. Then you want to take your measuring tape, and you want to take the very edge of your tape and you want to lay it against the folded edge of your garment, and you want to be able to measure straight across to the other side of that garment's waist to the folded edge. And you want to then calculate what your number is. So I'm not going to tell you what the number of this is, because that's not the whole point of this exercise. Plus, I don't think you could see it. But nonetheless, that's how you would measure the waist. Now, if you were measuring the hip, that's a little different, because the hip may be a different place, depending on, you know, what type of garment you have, what size the garment is. But let's just say you didn't know your hip placement, meaning where is the hip or the widest point of the skirt. In this case, it's showing you where the curved edge of the skirt is. You can pretty much, if you like to, kind of use that as a gauge for your hip. So in this case, because this skirt is the same length, front and back, and it sits on the body the same place, front and back, we're going to keep the front and the back panels laid one on top of the other. We're going to find the true curve, which is about here, of our skirt. And in this case, we're going to measure straight across, just like we did with our waist. We're going to take the metal edge of our measuring tape. We're going to lay it up against the very folded edge of the skirt, and we're going to measure straight across. And that is where we will find our hip, and we will calculate that number for our hip. Wonderful. Next, for the skirt, we want to take a couple of length measurements. And like I said earlier, for this skirt is a different length on the side than it is the center front and center back. And because I already know that my center front and my center backs are the same length, I'm not going to take a back measurement here, but I am going to take a side measurement and a center of the body measurement. So to do that, I'm not going to include my fringe just yet, okay? I am going to measure from the top edge of the waist to right where the edge of the fringe starts and the skirt body ends. Okay, so I'm going to again take the tip of my measuring tape to the top edge of my waist, and I'm going to measure straight down along the edge of the skirt to where the fringe starts and the skirt ends, and I'm going to take that number. Then I'm going to find roughly the center of my garment, which is about here. And again, I'm going to measure from this top edge to where the fringe starts and the skirt ends. And there you have it. There's the center measurement and the side measurement of my skirt. So in this case, I want to be able to tell my buyer that my side of my skirt length measures one thing, the center of my skirt length measures another. Again, letting your buyer know that this skirt is asymmetrical. That means that it is not the same length from one side to the other of the skirt. Okay, in this case, this skirt has fringe. So it has that extra length that's coming in the form of these really cool fringe strips, and that is what this is called. These are called fringe, and they're strips of fabric that have been cut evenly in width to create these cute little slivers of skirt. So I would want to take my fringe and I would want to measure from where the skirt ends and the fringe starts to the edge of that fringe. And I would let my buyer know that it has 7 inches or 6-inch length fringe beyond the skirt length. So that this way the buyer will know that the skirt panel may stop at a certain level, but the fringe will continue. So there you have it, how to measure a skirt. I hope this information has helped in some way with you learning how to measure your skirt product before listing. Hi there, it's Q from How To with Q back again to show you how to measure. So in this part of the video, we're going to be showing you how to measure a pant bottom. So in our first video or our earlier video, we showed you how to measure a skirt. So we're going to now gradually move on to items that become a little bit more difficult to measure or may have more measurements. So like in the skirt, very briefly recap for you, we measured the waist, the hip, and the body length of the skirt. So you really only need 3 measurements. But for a pant bottom, you need a couple of more measurements than what's needed for a skirt. So you'll still need to grab your soft measuring tape that come in inch and or centimeter increments. And for that pant bottom that you may be measuring, it's the same rule of thumb that we gave you when we measured the skirt. And that is, you always want to make sure your garment is completely on the table. So like I said to you earlier, if you've got a garment like a pant where the legs may be much longer than the width or the length of your table, it's okay to take your garment and fold it up while you measure the top, or take the top of the garment and fold it up while you measure the bottom. So I'll show you that example for instance. So with this pant bottom, as you can see here, the pant legs and the body of this garment actually is longer than the width, right, of my table. So just take your pant legs, fold them up, because right now I'm not measuring my pant legs. So I don't need those. I'm going to start by measuring the top of my garment, of my pant. So to be able to do that, the first thing I want to do is I want to be able to measure the top half of my pant. And just like the skirt, I want to start with measuring the waist. So that's the first measurement I'm going to take. Before I do that, there are a few things with a pant bottom that I want to make sure I do. If it has a functional fly zipper and center front button closure, I want to make sure that this functional fly zipper is closed completely, so it's zipped closed completely. I want to make sure my button is closed completely. I also want to make sure my pocket bags are flat. So I want to just put my hands in the pocket bags here, if you have front pockets, are flat. Then I want to take my crotch, which this is the crotch of the pant, and I want to pull it out and up. Because what I am trying to do is I'm trying to get all of the bulk from the back panel or from any other area of the garment and smooth it out. I want to make sure, like I advised on the skirt, that all of that fabric is moved out so that I can capture the full circumference or measurement of the actual garment. Now, I just said a word that I didn't talk about in my skirt, but I want to talk about here. That is circumference. So the measurement and circumference means the total measurement of the garment all the way around, 360 degrees around that garment. So when I take a measurement, which is called a flat measurement, from this edge to this edge of a garment, that's considered a flat measurement. But when I take that measurement that I got from measuring from this folded edge to this folded edge, and I times that measurement by the number 2, that will give me the total circumference of that area of the garment, okay? Hopefully that makes sense. I'll review that again with you as I go along. So like the skirt, I want to make sure my front and my back waist are laying flat, one on top of the other, and that I am forming a very straight edge of my waist. Then I want to take my measuring tape and I want to take the metal edge of my measuring tape, and like the skirt, I want to put it to the folded edge of my pant on one side of my pant. I also want to make sure I am measuring on the garment, not on the table. So my measuring tape shouldn't be here. My measuring tape should be here, and it should be aligned with the top edge of my waistband. So if I was to take that measurement, I would measure straight across, and as I'm measuring across, I am making sure that the back half of my hand is lightly pushing the fabric out of the way as I go across. I'm not stretching the fabric, I'm not pulling the fabric, but I am just lightly taking my back of my hand and brushing it across as I run the tape measure across. I want to stop at the center point of my waistband on the pant, and then I want to continue from there, following the top edge of the waistband. And this is very important. Why is this important? Because some waistbands have a little bit of curve built into them. Some waistbands are very, very straight. In this case, this waistband is very straight. But in some female brand clothing, pant bottoms, the waistband can sometimes have a little bit of curve. And that's just called what we call contour. That's contour that's built into the waistband that allows the band to wrap and sit around the body so that the waistband hugs the body from the back to the front of the body when the garment is on. So it wraps and it sits higher at the back and it comes down a little bit lower in the front. And that is called a contour. And the band is sometimes shaped like a half moon or a smile or a partial U. Again, in this case, this band is straight. So I still want to take the practice, use the practice of measuring along the top edge from one folded edge to the next. And then here's where I would gather my number. Now in this case, let's just say this waistband measured 20 inches flat. Remember we talked about that earlier? Flat just means I've only measured 1/2 of the body of the garment. But the total circumference would mean that this waist measures 40 inches. And by the way, this is a guy's pant. So flat is 20, circumference is 40. Now, in resale and or retail online, because your buyer cannot try the garment on, it's always best that you give your buyer the total circumference of the measurement, not the flat measurement. This way, if they're at home, they can take their measuring tape and they can wrap their measuring tape around their body to find their waist and determine if that 40-inch waist will fit them. Also, because in pant bottoms, especially in men's, but you see it, you're starting to see it some in women's today, but especially in men's, they give two measurements on the label or the hang tag. That is the waist measurement and that is the inseam measurement. So you want to make sure that when you tell your buyer this is a 40-inch waist, you're letting them know if they normally buy a man's pant, 40-inch waist, 32-inch inseam or 34-inch inseam, they probably can fit this garment. So remember, give the total circumference. Okay, that's the waist. That's one of the measures you want to take on a pant bottom. The next one is going to be the hip. So you want to shake your garment out and you're going to let your garment lay flat again. You may have to zhuzh it a little bit. That's a made up word, by the way. I think there is a spelling for it. But you just want to make sure that you, again, move all of the fabric out of the way, get it as flat as possible, roll that back panel fabric out from under itself. And when you lay your hands across, it should feel very flat. This time, as you can see, my waistband, front and back, are not laying one on top of the other. That is because I want to try and find the true hip of my pant bottom. And it's a little bit more difficult when you're doing a guy's pant because they don't really have hips, right? So their pants are a lot of times much straighter. But you want to try to find the widest point of that pant before getting too far down into the crotch area of the pant. So I'm going to guesstimate just roughly maybe about, I would say about 1/2 of an inch from below my fly is probably where my low hip would be on this pant. And I want to make sure that I take my metal edge or my edge of my measuring tape to the folded edge on one side. And then I am going to lightly brush fabric out of the way as I measure across. And I'm measuring across slightly at an angle. And the reason why I'm doing that is, as you can see, the front of my garment lays, it's actually the front of my waistband, center front waistband, sits a lot lower than the back of my waistband. So that means that the same location of the hip at the center of the garment is lower than the location of my hip at the side of my garment. See that? And if I were to measure from the top edge of my front to the top edge of my back, this is telling me it's 2 inches. So that probably means that if I was to strike a point on the side, that roughly about 2 inches at the center would be my hip at the center of my garment. Then I want to take my tape and slightly pivot it back up 2 inches on an angle to the other side. Because remember, the side of your front and back waistbands align and lay one on top of the other. But the center of your garment, front and back waistbands, do not. I hope I'm not confusing you and that makes sense to you. But if you were to keep these aligned and measure them, do you see how the whole garment pulls up? That would mean that you technically would not be measuring the accurate hip location on this garment if you were to keep your bands laid one on top of the other and then found and measured your hip. So that is the true proper way to find and measure your hip, especially when you don't know what your true hip location is on a garment. And most of the time you don't. You do not know what location is the hip for that designer or that maker. But that's a good way of figuring it out. So now we've measured our waist, we've measured our hip, When we get those flat numbers, we're going to convert them into circumference, and we're going to give our buyer the circumference of our waist and the circumference of our hip. Okay, the next place that you want to measure is called the front rise. That front rise is starting from the actual seamed edge at the crotch to the top edge of your waistband. And you want to take your measuring tape, again, the edge of your tape, and you want to line it exactly at the edge of that seam, which is actually called your inseam. And we'll get to that a little bit later. And you want to measure up, straight up, to the top edge of your center front waistband. And that is how you get your front rise. Now, you do not need to double the front rise measurement because it is not a circumference measurement. It is a linear measurement that goes up and down once, and it only goes up and down on one part of the body, okay? But we know that the front rise is connected to the back rise. So this is where the total rise comes into play. So we've gotten our front rise. We would want to flip our garment around so that the front of the garment is laying face down on the table. The back of the garment is now up facing you to get your back rise measurement. And like the front, you want to pull fabric out of the crotch because you want to find that same inseam and front and back crotch intersection. And you want to pull it straight. And I'm hoping you can see this. But you want to measure your rise straight, okay? So again, you want to align your measuring tape at the edge of that seam, and you want to measure straight up to the top edge of the back waistband edge now. And you want to calculate or write down your number of your measurement finding there. So that is how you measure the front and the back rise. So far we've got 4 measurements on a pant bottom. We have the waist, we have the low hip, we have the front rise, and we have the back rise. But guess what? We are not done there. So now, you want to measure the leg of your garment because it's important to tell your buyer a few things about how the leg of the garment measures. And just like the top of the body, you want to lay your garment flat, making sure you've pulled all fabric out because you want to capture, again, the total circumference of the leg. So that's right, when you get to the leg with measurements, leg with measurements, W-I-D-T-H, not with, W-I-T-H, but leg with measurements, W-I-D-T-H, you need to give the total circumference. So in this case, we are going to measure several points on the leg, and I always recommend that you measure the left leg or the side of the body that has the most rise construction. So if you have a fly and it's on the left side of the body, or your rise stitching is on the left side of the body, I always prefer that you measure that left leg because that's going to be the side of the garment that has the most workmanship. And probably if you've got an issue in measurements, you'll find that they're maybe slightly smaller than on the right. They should be the same measurements left to right, but sometimes that doesn't always happen. Okay, so the first measurement we want to take on the leg is what we call the inseam. So again, remember that rise seam that we had right here? We're going to take our end of our measuring tape, where that edge is, and we're going to align it right at that edge. And we're going to follow our inseam line all the the way down to the bottom, hopefully you can see that, of the leg opening, okay? So again, from the rise seam all the way to the bottom of the leg opening edge is what you're gonna measure to calculate your inseam. And again, because your inseam is a linear measurement, you don't need to give a circumference, meaning you don't need to times it by 2. But there are a few leg measurements that you'll probably want to make sure you give your buyer, and those are leg circumference measurements that are the leg width, W-I-D-T-H. And the first one is the leg width at crotch point, and that is called your thigh. So you want to give your thigh measurement by taking the edge of your tape and laying it exactly at the edge of your rise and your folded edge intersection. And you want to take your tape and perpendicularly line your tape up to the straight leg point of your leg, and you want to go to the other folded edge side. And that is how you measure your thigh. Once you get that point of measure and the number, you want to times that by 2 and give the total thigh circumference. Then the next measurement that you may want to do is called your knee measurement. Now the knee placement for each designer, brand, or label may be slightly different, but how you can identify it without knowing is just about where the inside of the leg curves just a little bit before the leg goes very straight again. We're going to use that as our knee point. We're going to find roughly that area. We're going to take our measuring tape, align the top edge of the tape to the edge of the garment, pushing and moving fabric out of the way so we get it as flat as possible to the other side folded edge. And again, we're going to times that number by 2, giving the total knee circumference. Then when we get to the leg opening, this is called the leg opening. That's at the bottom edge of your leg, okay? And you're going to do the same thing. You're going to repeat exactly what you did. You're going to take your folded edge of your garment and the edge of your tape, and you're going to measure to the other side folded edge. You're going to times that number by 2, and you're going to give what is called your leg opening circumference. So there you have it. Those are the core measurements to measuring a pant bottom. So let's review those points of measure again. The first point of measure is the waist. The second point of measure is the hip. The third and fourth points of measure are the front and the back rises. Then we go to the leg, and we have on the leg, we have the first point of measure is the thigh at crotch point. The second point of measure is the knee. And then the third point of measure is the leg opening. And then that last point of measure is the inseam. Okay? So we have several measurements on the on the pant that we want to measure. Now, because this garment, speaking of pockets, does actually have front pockets and have back pockets, you definitely may want to measure those if you are the type of reseller who likes to give those types of details. I do not give those details, but if a buyer asked me to give those details, I will definitely share those details in a private message to that buyer. But for the purpose of my listings, to keep them simple, I try to just stick to the core body measurements, which are going to be most important for a buyer to make an initial response or transaction with you. Okay, so that concludes how to measure a pant bottom. Hello again, this is Q with How To with Q, and we are going to continue this segment of how to measure and evaluate our garment to prepare it for listing on our resale website store. So if you were able to catch parts 1 and 2 of how to measure, you would have been able to see how we measured the skirt and how we measured the pant bottom. Now moving on to our top. So we've selected a very simple top that is a crew neck top, and we're going to show you a few key points or core points of measure that we think are the most valuable points of measure to place in your listing to let your buyer know what or how that garment should fit them based on the measurements you provide. So in our earlier videos, if you're just tuning in, the earlier part of this video segment, if you're just tuning in, we said that you need a soft measuring tape, if possible, a hard edge ruler or clear ruler of some kind. This is the kind we're using. A table or an area that is a flat surface wide enough to put your garment completely on. And making sure that you work in a lit or well-lit area or in a room that has lighting, even if it's considered natural lighting, but enough where you can actually see what you're doing and see the garment. Okay, so now moving on to our top. Unlike our pant and our skirt bottoms, the top how to measure is going to be a little bit different. There are going to be some likenesses as far as terms used, but definitely different on how we measure. So I have come to learn from the buyers that buy from QC Consigns that there are certain things that the buyer becomes obsessive about when wanting measurements for a garment to determine if that garment is going to fit them. So no, it is not important enough. It's not enough. I should say it's not important enough because it is important, but it's not enough to just put the size from the size label in the listing. You're going to also want to make sure you're measuring the garment to give specific areas of that garment's measurement to the buyer. Okay, so let's get started. The first area of measure that I like to provide the buyer with is the length of the front and back of the garment. That is one of the questions buyers always ask. What is the center front length and what is the center back length of the garment? Some tops or blouses or t-shirts do not always have the front length measuring the same as the back length. This top is one of them. As you can see here, the bottom edge of the front of this top finishes at a different length than the back edge or the back panel of this top. So I'm going to have to give that buyer a front measurement and a back measurement. Now here is where it gets a little tricky because I want to make sure that when I'm capturing the total length of the garment, I'm also including the shoulder because your garment anchors off the highest point of your body, which is your shoulder. That is called the high point shoulder area. This area right here, not including my crew neck rib, is called the high point shoulder or HPS. And you want to take your center front and center back length straight down from that point. Now, you say to yourself, well, if my high point shoulder is way over here, the center of my garment is way over here, How am I going to get the true center of my garment from measuring from my high point shoulder, which is off to the side of the body of the garment? Well, this is where our trusty clear plastic ruler or straight edge item comes into play. I am so excited for us. So I'm just going to flip the garment around just a second so you can see this. So again, here is the high point of my shoulder. I am going to take the straight edge of my ruler and I am going to lay the top edge of my ruler and align it with the high point of my shoulder right there. And I'm then going to make sure my garment is flat. I'm going to take my trusty soft measuring tape. Again, I'm going to take the front edge of that tape. And guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to find roughly the center of my garment at the top. I'm going to align the edge of my measuring tape with the edge of the hard edge ruler. And I'm going to measure straight down to the bottom edge of my front of my garment. And that is my center front measurement. How cool is that little trick? If I wanted to do the back of my garment, I would do the same thing by simply flipping my garment where the front of the body panel is laying flat on the table, face down. And now the back of my garment is facing up towards me. I would then find my high point shoulder again. I would measure my high point shoulder here. Sorry, not measure, I would lay my hard edge ruler or straight edge item up against my high point shoulder, and I would measure straight down to find my back length. And that is how you can easily find the center front and center back measurement lengths on a top from the highest point of the garment, which is called the high point shoulder. That is how you would find the total center length. Now, if you wanted to say in your listing 2 center front lengths and you wanted it to be center front length from high point shoulder or center front length from the center neck, all you would have to do is find the center of your garment and measure down from the neck. You can do both, whichever you feel comfortable with. Okay, so those are the first core measurements that I would do on the top. The next core measurement that I would do on the top would be what I call the across shoulder. That is from one edge where the armhole seam is to the other edge where the armhole seam is. And I would take my measuring tape from where one armhole seam is and measure straight across to the other armhole seam. And that is called my across shoulder. And I would do it at the top edge of the shoulder of my garment. Okay? Then the next measurement that I like to give is the chest circumference. So remember that word? We learned that word at when we did our pant bottom how to measure. We want to do our chest circumference. So when we give our across shoulder, that's a circumference measurement. So you want to times that by 2. The same thing with the chest. When you're doing the circumference of the chest, when you get that measurement, you want to times it by 2. When you're doing the center front and center back lengths, that's a linear measurement. There's no front and back in the sense of them being connected, so that is not a circumference. You simply just give a front and you give a back measurement. But here in this case, for the chest, you want to take your straight edge of your measuring tape and you want to measure from the armpit, which is roughly about here along the side seam edge. This is your side seam. You want to measure 1 inch down. When you find that 1 inch location, you then want to place your measuring tape where your edge of your tape is on the folded edge of your garment. Once again, making sure your garment is flat. And as you go along across the body, you want to lightly push fabric out of the way to the other side of the garment at the same 1 inch down from the armpit. That is your chest measurement. If you times it by 2, that is your chest circumference. Now, buyers don't always know what we know about how to measure a garment. So a buyer may ask you, what is the measurement of your top from armpit to armpit? What they're simply asking you is, what is the chest circumference? Or what is the chest measurement? Buyers also don't understand that when you give a number, you want to give the total circumference of the chest. I've had many buyers go, well, that seems very large. It should be 12 when you're giving them 24. And sometimes we have to explain to them, no one has a 12-inch chest that is an adult. 12 inches is a flat number. That's only the front part of the garment. You have to include the back part of the garment, which is why you need to give them the total circumference. Because when you put a top on, you're putting it on the front and the back of your body, okay? So that's just a little backstory and an explanation when you get buyers who are completely clueless about this chest measurement. All right, the next measurement that I like to give is what I call the bottom opening or the bottom sweep. S-W-E-E-P, sweep. That is the bottom edge of your garment or the bottom opening of your garment. This is also a circumference measurement. Now, in this case on this top, I've got a rib that's attached to a woven garment. I've got a rib knit trim attached to the bottom of my garment. So in this case, I will sometimes give 2 measurements for my sweep. I will give the bottom opening or sweep measurement at the rib seam, and I will give a bottom opening or sweep measurement at the bottom edge of the rib. Why do I do that? I do that because a lot of designers will build this rib smaller than at the waist seam. Sometimes they intend for the bottom of the garment to hug where the rib is tighter and it hugs to allow the shirt to blouson over, which means to blouse over or hang over. So I want to make sure I capture that for the buyer in my measurements. But the concept is the same, whether you're doing it at the seam or whether you're doing it at the bottom edge. You want to make sure that your item is flat. You do not want to stretch your item. Just lay it flat. Make sure there's no fabric tucked underneath there. And again, you want to go from the edge of your garment with the edge of your measuring tape, and you want to measure straight across to the other side folded edge. You want to take that measurement, times it by 2, and give them the total circumference of the bottom opening or the total circumference of the bottom sweep. And that is how you measure the bottom half of your garment. Now, the next measurement that you want to give on the top is the sleeve length. That's really important, guys. So in this case, you want to take the sleeve length and you want to measure it from the armhole seam down to the bottom edge of your sleeve. Okay? So you want to go from the armhole edge where the armhole seam is, and you want to measure straight down on the outside of the garment to the bottom edge of that sleeve opening, okay? Now let's just say you had an asymmetrical sleeve, kind of like we have the skirt, where maybe the outside sleeve area may be longer than the inside sleeve area. In that case, you would follow the same kind of concept. You would measure from the armpit straight down to the bottom opening of the sleeve at the underseam of the sleeve. This is called the underseam of the sleeve. This is called the top edge of the sleeve. Okay? Now, that's one way to measure your sleeve. Another way to measure the sleeve, some people, and I've seen this in listings, it's a little confusing, but I've seen it called out, where some sellers will say the sleeve length from center back. Okay, well, what does that mean and how do you measure that? That means, and the easiest way to do that is you would fold your garment in half this way, okay? So you want to make sure your neck is laid on top, your bottom half is laid on top, your armholes or armpits are aligned, your sleeves are aligned, and everything is flat. This now becomes the center back of your garment. And this is what we call a 3-point measurement. Kind of like how we did in the low hip and the pant bottom. So we want to measure from the center back by taking our edge, and we want to measure and we want to lay that across and go straight across. Then we want to pivot our tape, go down to our armhole seam, pivot the tape again, and go straight down to the bottom opening of the sleeve. I'm going to face the garment this way for those of you that may not have captured it the other way there. Again, this is the center back of my garment. The edge of my tape to the edge of the center back, straight across to the armhole, pivot, down, down. Okay? All right, and that's how you would do sleeve length from center back. I say to make it easier on yourself, do the sleeve length from the armhole, especially if you've got what they call a set-in sleeve, which is just a regular armhole with a sleeve set into it. But if you have a raglan sleeve construction or a kimono or a dolman or a drop shoulder sleeve, those I would say you probably want to give the sleeve measurement from center back. Okay, let's review the core points of measurement for a top. You want to give the front and back lengths, the chest measurement, the bottom opening or bottom sweep measurement, the across shoulder measurement, as well as the sleeve length measurement from the armhole or the sleeve length measurement from the center back of the garment. I hope this information has helped you understand how to measure a top. Hello again. This is Q from QC Consigns, and we are going to be doing our How To with Q segment. This is the last part of our segment of how to measure. So our last and final item that we're going to do measurements on is going to be this handbag. So we just did how to measure a skirt, how to measure a pant bottom, how to measure a top, and now we're going to do how to measure a bag. All right, so there are a few core measurements, the same as with a garment, that you want to make sure you capture for your buyer to get your buyer to understand what the measures of that item is. That gives them some kind of idea of the size of that item or the scale of that item. Okay, so for this tote that we have here today that we're going to use in our example, and yes, this is an authentic Burberry bag that happens to be on sale here at QC Consigns. There are a few key or core measurements your buyer must know, and in some marketplace areas are required for you to even list your item. And I know for a fact on eBay, these measurements that we're going to give you today are core measurements that are required. They're not recommended, there's a difference, but they are required by eBay that they be in or a part of your listing details area. So it is important that you understand how to capture that. Okay, so the first thing we're going to measure on this bag is going to be the bag straps. This is considered the bag straps. And the bag strap measurement is called a depth. It's the strap depth measurement. And that means the distance from this folded edge of the measurement inside, of the strap inside, to the top edge of your bag, which is basically going to give your buyer an understanding of if they lap that strap on their arm or their shoulder, how much space or distance do they have? How low will that bag hang from either one of those points? Okay, so again, like I'm always saying, please make sure you have your tools. You will need your soft measuring tape, which is going to be really important. All righty. So when measuring the strap distance or strap depth, you want to take your measuring tape, you want to line it up or butt it up against the top inside edge of that strap, and you want to go straight down to the top edge of your bag, and that is your strap distance, strap depth. The next measurement that you want to do for your bag, or maybe this tote, in this case, this tote is a different measurement at the top than it is at the bottom. So it kind of is shaped like this, right? So I want to give two width measurements. W-I-D-T-H, width. I want to give a top width measurement, and I want to give a bottom width measurement. From this distance to this distance is considered my width, straight across this way. Okay, so to do that, I want to go and I want to pinch my bag at the top, just like this, and I want to measure from one edge of my bag to the other edge, folded edge of my bag, and that's how I get the top width measurement of my bag. Now, like I said earlier, this bag is a different width at the top edge than it is at the bottom. The bottom of the bag is smaller in width than it is at the top. So in this case, I want to take my tape and I want to measure from this corner, bottom corner of my bag to this bottom corner of my bag, and that is the bottom width of my bag measurement. So now I've given my buyer an understanding of how deep the strap is going to be, how wide my bag is going to be at top and bottom, and now I want to give them what is called the height, H-E-I-G-H-T. This is the height of the bag. And in this case, I want to measure, and I like to do this. I like to find the corner of the bag and measure from the top edge to that bottom corner. Sometimes because bags kind of roll at the front or at the side, you're not going to get an accurate height of the bag. So that's why it's really, really important, I think, to go from the corner at the bottom to the top edge, and you're going to align your measuring tape to the top edge, and you're going to measure all the way to the very bottom corner of that bag to find the total height of your bag. The next measurement you want to give the buyer is called the bag depth. What that simply means is that is the width of the bag going this way. It's how deep the bag is. It's called the depth of the bag. And the best way to understand how deep was this bag built this way, right? You got the depth this way up and down because you just gave them the height. But how to do it in width-wise of the bag this way, it's called the bag depth. And I like to capture the bag depth by measuring the bottom of the bag from edge to edge. So in this case, I would take the bottom of my bag, and as you can see here, you can see from this edge to this edge gives me a really good indication of the bag depth. So I would measure from this pointed edge to that pointed edge to get my bag depth. Hope that makes sense. Okay. And those are really all the measurements you would need to give the buyer on your bag, core measurements. There may be some other things you may want to measure out and give the buyer from a details perspective, but the core measurements, the absolute bare minimum that you should give a buyer on a handbag is if it has a strap, whether it's removable, crossbody, or a tote strap like this that goes over the shoulder. You want to give the strap depth or length. And again, this is the strap depth. If I was measuring the strap length, I would measure from this top edge of the bag, and I would take my measurement and I would wrap that measurement all the way around to the other side. If I had a removable strap, I would remove the strap, lay it flat on the table, and just measure straight. But in this case, you don't need to do all of that. Just give the bag strap depth, and that will be more than fine. The next is the bag width, top and bottom, or just the top if they're the same width, top and bottom. You're going to also give the bag height, which is linear up and down. And then you're going to give the bag depth, which is how deep the bag is in this direction. Okay, I truly hope that this segment of How To with Q, showing you how to measure your garments and or how to measure your handbag items, have helped you. And like I said in the opening of this video, this may not be everything, but it is truly some key core ways of measuring these items that's going to help you sell your item and give your buyer accurate information. Thank you for hanging out with me while I show you how to measure a handbag. Okay, well, I hope that you enjoyed the first part of our How To with Q, where we have showed our newbie resellers how to measure their product, whether it be in apparel or garment form, or whether it be in an item like this tote. I hope you've learned a lot from the type of materials you should use, to the type of environment you should be in, even some terminology that maybe should be used in your listing, along with even how to read the increments of measure on a measuring tape. So please come back and join us for part 2 of How To with Q, where we will continue our prep for how to look at the conditions of a garment or an item before listing it, to make sure that you have given your buyer all the information he or she may need to make the best purchase possible. In the meantime, thank you for joining me. My name is Q, and I'm from QC Consigns, and this is How To with Q. Stay tuned for part 2, where we will talk about how to evaluate items' condition to give your buyer inside information to the condition of an item before they purchase it. Thank you.